Back in business with me, Harsha Subramaniam, and decoding Budget 2013 for you. Joining me now, Godrej, Chairman of the Godrej Group, President CII. Also with us, Nenal Kidwai, Country Head of HSBC India, President of FICCI. Many thanks for joining us. Nenal, I'll start with you. This budget's biggest focus was clearly on reviving growth. Do you believe this will get growth back on track for the economy?
Well, I think the most important part of this budget, and indeed the economic survey which preceded it yesterday, is that growth is very much on the agenda. And the finance minister started his speech saying that growth was paramount, and indeed within that, industry and manufacturing and all that supports growth was important. And in fact, for growth to continue was critical to benefit all levels of society. So he clearly establishes that growth is important for every aspect of India's development, whether at a social level or indeed at an economic level. So I think to that extent the focus is very real. We have seen an earnest effort through the budget to ensure that industry gets a certain kick in terms of investment. The investment allowance was an important feature that has come back into this budget. FICCI's ask had really been to look at exactly this, or accelerated depreciation, as a way of kick-starting investment. And I can't say we really believed it would come, but we're delighted that it's there. This would again suggest that government does recognize the role of industry and investment in industry as an important element. So I think what we have is a budget which has done a very careful tightrope walking. There's no big magic here, but on the other hand, the fact that it has not leaned towards populism, which was a worry on the one hand, and on the other not been overly aggressive in terms of revenue numbers, as in tax increases are there, but they're not huge, has suggested that it's the best in a very difficult world.
Mr. Godrej, while the finance minister spelled out his fiscal roadmap quite clearly, it's still not very clear where he is going to get the money to fund the deficit. Do you believe that this government will manage to stick to these numbers that they put out?
Yes, I think the subsidies will be much lower because already diesel prices are being increased every month. So I think the subsidy bill in the next financial year will be much lower than in this financial year. I think disinvestment could earn more than in this financial year. Disinvestment should start from April itself, so that by the end of the year it can add considerably to the revenues.
Same question to you, Nenal Kidwai, on the fiscal deficit. Do you think the numbers add up?
Well, you know, when you say that you've got to 5.2% for this year, there's no lack of detail there. It has been achieved, and it has been achieved with RE numbers being scaled back. And at the end of the day, it is very fortunate that we have come at 5.2% rather than the 6% plus, which we were in fact fearing. Can we get to 4.8? A jump from 5.2 to 4.8, or improvement from 5.2 to 4.8 is not difficult if we continue on the path as has been set forth in this budget. I think the tougher question is, do we get to growth of 6.1 to 6.7 while looking at the fiscal deficit being contained at the 4.8? And to get to that number, and I've been trying to piece it together because it wasn't in the finance minister's speech. Some of it has been in the fine print, which our teams are still analyzing. But we saw what was really a small number being added to revenues happening of the direct and indirect taxes, which totted up to just 18,000 crores, whereas the expenditure budget has seen almost 200,000 crores added to it. So where is the rest of the funding coming from? And I was just looking at the numbers, and they're quite interesting because the things he did not mention were 40,000 crores as telecom receipts, 58,800 crores as disinvestment, and then it really is therefore saying that we would get about 19 to 20% growth in tax revenues, which comes off growth. So that's the imponderable. Does growth return to the economy enough to yield 19 to 20% tax revenues back into the government?
Sure.
And of course, I do think the disinvestment target is achievable as long as the markets remain up. And of course, telecom receipts, to my mind, is one of those big imponderables, as in the number does look quite rich here. So the totting up on the revenue side to achieve what is an increased expenditure budget, because you heard him say there were increases both from BE and RE terms, which were quite aggressive. The challenge to my mind is going to be on the revenue side. So we're going to have to watch this quite closely. In order to achieve the growth of 6.1 to 6.7, we're going to have to see tax revenues go up. And indeed the two really corroborate each other to the extent that if growth doesn't happen, then tax revenues don't happen. So those two are going to have to move hand in hand. So it's a very tough tightrope walk. I think quite achievable, but on the other hand, it's not going to be easy getting there.
All right. A very quick point, Naina, and this is about the current account deficit. While while the speech very clearly says he acknowledges the problem with the current account, one did not see specific measures. Do you believe that the situation of the current account will still get out of hand? Does the budget really address any of these issues?
Well, he has made a lot of mention on the energy sector, addressing issues which are quite detailed and don't necessarily have to be in the budget, to do with the NELP and looking at the oil and gas discovery environment in India, where quite honestly I do believe it's a shame that we haven't got gas pricing right at a time when energy prices are high and the country is power short, to the point where the gas that has been discovered in the basins in and around our coast have not found their way into the system at all. So it's going to be important to get our gas regulation, gas pricing, all of these areas resolved. The budget does address some of these. We have to now make sure that the ministries roll this out. The budget also talks about renewables, both in terms of wind and solar, and even in terms of waste conversion to energy. So on every aspect of the power space, we are seeing, and oil and energy security, we do see some desire to address it. And I think that helps our current account deficit, although maybe not in the first 12 months, that is critical for us, but down the line. Because energy, as you well know, has been one of the biggest, our oil import bill is one of the biggest reasons why the CAD has been beyond control. The second, of course, is gold. And to that, again, there are a number of nitty-gritty provisions to do with, I would say, enhancing savings to move into productive investments. And what I mean by that is products which allow for movement and investment into investments, whether it's to do with mutual funds.
Sure. Now, I'm going to have to slip into a break. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation with Adi Godrej and Naina Al-Kidwai, specifically on what this budget has done in terms of reviving the investment cycle. Back in business, 2 minutes. Welcome back. You're watching In Business. I'm Harsha Subramaniam, and we're in conversation with Adi Godrej and Naina Al-Kidwai on what Budget 2013 has really done. Adi Godrej, were you a bit disappointed that you did not see any grand plans on the reforms front? Were you satisfied with what you heard, specifically on GST?
No, I think the actions on the GST front over the last few weeks have been very good. I think there have been meetings with the Empowered Committee. I think he did mention that GST is a very important reform. He wants to take it forward. I think he has agreed to some of the demands the states have made, which has held back the implementation of the GST. So I think the GST would will go forward. And if the GST can be implemented during the next financial year, it could help in terms of deficit containment too.
Even though the finance minister is trying to create more inclusive growth, Mr. Godrej, there's no clarity on where the financing is going to come from. Will this be enough?
No, I think incentives don't need financing. Incentives like encouraging people to invest in mutual funds, encouraging people to invest in the stock market, encouraging certain types of savings, all that will be very helpful, because over the last couple of years people's savings went excessively into gold. That led to large gold imports, which affects the current account deficit. So I think all the steps he is taking are in the right direction. It will help correct some of the problems we are facing in the economy currently.
Nana Lal Kidwai, this is a point that we've been talking to most corporates here on Bloomberg, is this whether this budget revives the investment cycle. Do you think it does?
I think, the issue here is the focus on the investment allowance is only one aspect. The reasons that industry has stayed away from investment are many, and a lot of it has to do with stuff outside the budget. What does the regulatory regime look like? What is the power situation? How easy is it to get the approvals that you need at every level to set up an industry? So these are some of the issues which have to be handled in some cases at the state level. In other cases, improving of the power sector lying squarely with the CCI right now, that is the Cabinet Committee on Investments, where many power projects are stuck. So the full fabric of why investment is not happening has to be addressed. The investment allowance is a step in the right direction, but even more important, the fact that both the economic survey and the budget recognize the importance of investment coming back should hopefully lead to all the other things that need to happen which lie outside the budget, but they do need to happen.
Adi Godrej, while we've seen the grand plans at this point in time on what the finance minister said, do you think implementation is going to be a key concern?
Implementation and execution is always a concern in India. In many of the cases we have seen that lack of implementation and execution is more of a problem sometimes than the policy itself. But I must say, since this finance minister has taken over, implementation has been expedited, and I expect good execution of the budget proposals.
One final question, sir, and this is specifically with respect to the focus on the social sector programs. There's been a lot of focus on social sector spending. Do you believe this will fuel rural consumption and keep this going?
Yes, I think expenditure directed towards rural areas, expenditure directed towards women's activities, etc., are very good for the FMCG sector, because it leads to higher consumption once there is more discretionary and disposable income in the hands of rural India.
All right, we'll have leave it there. Adi Godrej, Nana Lal Kidwai, many thanks for joining us with your perspective on the special edition of In Business, talking about what the budget 2013 had in store. Before we go, here are quick moments of what the finance minister had to say, key highlights from his budget speech.
Now the budget. Shri Chidambaram.
Madam Speaker, I rise to present the budget for the year 2013-2014. Faced with a huge fiscal deficit, I had no choice but to rationalize expenditure. We took a dose of bitter medicine. It seems to be working. When I need to raise resources, who can I go to except those who are relatively well placed in society? There is a little bit of the spirit of Mr. Azim Premji in every affluent taxpayer. I propose to impose a surcharge of 10% on persons whose taxable income exceeds rupees 1 crore per year. The CAD continues to be high, mainly because of our excessive dependence on oil imports, the high volume of coal imports, our passion for gold. We have to find over $75 billion to finance the CAD. Madam Speaker, I commend the budget to the House.